development and wire for telecommunications, and also like electricity wires. So yep.
Great.
And
Good.
the headquarters are located in Highland Heights, Kentucky, which is really close to Cincinnati because that's where I'm gonna live.
So what heights?
Yes, Highland Heights. Highland Heights.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that's an interesting bit of detail for us. So what I've done, Juan Jose, I'm so happy, you know, because this is, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. This is fate. You know, my roots are right in that area. And so we've been talking about paying attention to local history because my roots are in the area of Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky in particular, by the way. I'll have to look and see where exactly Highland Heights is, but we'll be looking at some maps in the next half hour. And I've been paying a lot of attention to Cincinnati throughout my life. So when you told me you were coming out here, I prepared a little bit of what I have observed in my lifetime about the area of Cincinnati. So you're about ready to get more information than you want.
Thanks a lot.
Here we go.
Ah, look at that. Oh.
Okay, let's go. Put on your seatbelt. More information than you want coming right up. So Cincinnati started out as Queen of the West in 1800. This is the Ohio River. You've looked on the map, right? You've
Yes.
seen it? Well, we'll look on the maps again. And just here, just look at the rivers. Now, this is at the time of the end of the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War. And so you can see that the three rivers come together to form the great trunk of the Mississippi. The Missouri and the Ohio join up with it. And Cincinnati is right here at this bend. We'll come back to this map in a second. But I want the rest of our class to know that you come from a country with a very important river also. Just like the Mississippi goes right down the middle of our country, I want the rest of your classmates to know about your great Magdalena River that goes right down the middle of your country. We don't think of Columbia as having a big river, but it does. And you can see there's three mountain ranges, and the Magdalena goes right between the two. This is where Juan Jose is as we speak in Bogota. And this river starts up way in the south, in the highlands. This is the source. It picks up steam as it goes downhill, heading for the Caribbean. And then where it enters the Caribbean in the mouth, it widens out and becomes more jungle. And I highly recommend you read Gabriela Marquez's novel, Love in the Time of Cholera, because the leading character is the Magdalena River. The way he describes it is amazing. So getting back to the Ohio River. So before the Europeans came, this was a center of Native American settlement. And this is, they claim, was the largest continuous hilltop native settlement. It was the Shawnee tribe mainly. There were other tribes who invaded later. But now, like, we go back to the French and Indian War. These are the major battles. We're not going to spend much time on it, just to note that there was a colonel in the British Army named Washington, who was sent on an expedition, and arguably one of his Indian guides started the French and Indian War by massacring a French officer. And I'll also mention here that how was Washington paid? Washington was his salary was the Ohio country, part of the Ohio country at the end of the war, if the British prevailed. It was sort of like an incentive bonus. So he had title to real estate by because he'd been a British colonel, a British officer. He also had other land that he'd been paid with for doing survey work when he was a young man, a teenager, in fact. So at the time that he died, George Washington was the richest man in America, according to John Furling, who looked into this, because he was basically an Ohio Valley real estate land speculator. And one theory as to why he became a revolutionary was the British had said, okay, you own all this land, but we don't want to fight with the Indians anymore. And so no one is allowed to go west of the Appalachian Mountains. The crest of the Appalachian Mountains was the border, and no British colonial was allowed to go west. And Washington, sitting on all this land for a decade, stewing at this potential wealth, and finally he becomes a revolutionary. A cynic might say he did it for personal gain, but this is one of the maps that parceled out some land to Washington as payment. All right, so back to the end of the 7 Years' War, the Brits won, and they took all the pink territory away from the French. The French had been there first, and the French got along very well with the Indians, much better than the English. I'm not saying it was perfect, but they got along well. And most Indians fought on the side of the French, although some did fight on the side of the British. But the settlement was that England got all this land, but George Washington said, "Oh boy!" But the British said, "Nope, you can't. Nobody can go west of the Appalachians." It's interesting. The yellow part for a while was Spanish. We know it later on. Napoleon sells it to Jefferson. But at that time, the Spanish and the French were very tightly bound together. And I think Napoleon put his brother on the throne of Spain. So Spain was just kind of a puppet, but they controlled this area. And when you go to Louisiana, as you should, Juan Jose, Cincinnati is linked culturally to New Orleans. Because of the commerce, the Ohio River and the Mississippi, it's much easier to send your goods downstream than upstream. So New Orleans became a very important sister city for Cincinnati. We don't think of Cincinnati as being very glamorous, but by the end of this lecture, you will. And when you go to New Orleans, you see the distinct styles of architecture in the old city. And you certainly see French influence, but you also see Spanish influence because of the decades that Spain controlled it before Napoleon took it back over and sold it to Jefferson. To America. And that, I think, was like, what, 1806, something like that, Juan Jose. Yeah, I hope I'm not assuming you know too much about American history. I'm trying to make it as simple as I can for you. So you'll be prepared when you get off the plane at the Cincinnati International Airport, which is in Northern Kentucky. So you can go straight to your new city without going to Ohio. What happened then, the colonials were not very obedient to King George, and they started sneaking across west of the Appalachians and causing trouble. And then they just caused trouble for King George, and there was the American Revolution. And have you seen the musical Alexander Hamilton yet, Juan Jose?
No, no, sir. I don't think I have.
Well, see if you can run it down. It's a very easy way for you to learn about colonial America. And this is the time we're talking about. All the time from when Alexander Hamilton came to the mainland from the Caribbean. You know, St. Kitts, the Caribbean island, that's where Alexander Hamilton was born. He was born in your neighborhood, in the neighborhood of the Caribbean. And he was a British subject, and he came as a British subject to America. And around 1774 and became a revolutionary quite rapidly. So run down Alexander Hamilton. Your nephew has memorized it and knows all the songs. It's a musical, and there's rap lyrics. And if you're going to come and live in America, part of your homework, and I'm assigning you today, is to run down Alexander Hamilton. It's been available on the Disney Channel. I hope it still is. But if you don't run it down, well, I'll run it down for you. And when you get here, we'll watch it on Zoom. How's that?
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Okay. So then the colonials come in. Americans finally, after the revolution, start fighting with the Indians, defeat the Indians, and they finally say at the Treaty of Greenville, look, we're taking over Ohio. You move to Indiana. Indiana was intended to mean the land of the Indians. The Treaty of Greenville said, Americans, Europeans will not go west of this line. Everything west of this line is Indiana, the land of the Indians. We have a saying here, the Indians did, white men speak with forked tongue. What does forked tongue means? It means giving two messages at the same time. I think this was meant to be Bill Clinton. So that's what forked tongue means. Got to learn a little more American slang. So what ended when the Indians left the Ohio Valley? There was a 1,000-year Mississippian civilization. They built amazing mounds, kind of earthen pyramids, all along the Mississippi and the Ohio and the Missouri. Now, what I want to focus on now is another river. It's called the Licking River. And this is important to me because this is where my mother and father met, on the Licking River in northern Kentucky. And so what does licking mean? Why? Well, the soil and rocks here were salty, and it attracted animals, which meant that there was good game hunting. So this part of northern Kentucky is quite prosperous. And now, Juan Jose, I want to know how far your city is from the Licking River. Write that down. Figure that out for me, okay? I want to know. And this is a boat on the Licking River looking across to the Ohio, which you can't see, but you can see part of it here, where the Licking empties into the Ohio. And on the north side of the river is Cincinnati. It's the city of 7 hills. This is laid out quite well. The hills are well defined. But I want to direct your attention, Juan Jose, to a historic site near Cincinnati called the Big Bone Lick State Historic Site. So again, you have this salty rock formation that attracts animals that just like cows, like salt licks. Wild animals do too. And it attracted megafauna over centuries to this part of northern Kentucky. And this is going to be important in the history of science. You can't believe, you think I'm exaggerating at this point. How could a state historic site change the course of scientific thought? Well, it can, and it's going to deserve a visit from you. You'll be over here somewhere. And it's not going to be far to go down to Big Bone Lick State Historic Park and plug in. I know Tim has already told you about the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky. Kentucky's also famous for bourbon, and I know you'll be going over there. So on your Bourbon Trail tour, build in a stop at Big Bone Lick State Historic Park. So what made this important? Well, the French were there, and in 1739, a Frenchman found some mastodon teeth.
Are you recording it?
Uh-huh. And he picked up the mastodon teeth, and this is mentioned in Elizabeth Colbert's recent book called The Sixth Extinction, an excellent book. And this is about our environment, the Anthropocene, and that we, the humans, human, may be causing the sixth extinction. And in the book, she deals with the whole issue of extinction. Nobody believed in Jefferson's time that extinctions of animals were possible. Why would God put an animal on Earth and allow it to die out? So extinction was a foreign concept. But this Frenchman in 1739 starts a trail of thought that leads to the conclusion and the realization that animals can die out, period. So a little bit more of that story. This is from Elizabeth Colbert's book. He's there, he has some Iroquois with him. They're in bad shape. They're living off acorns. And they come to the east bank of the Ohio. This is Big Lick. And his men smelled sulfur. And they went down, and there in the muck were thousands of huge bones. And they were able to find teeth in these skeletons, the size of a human hand, weighing 10 pounds. And he picked up these teeth, as long as some huge bones, and he took them back with him to France. Why were the animals there? These huge mega animals, the mammoths, they were there for the salt. And this is the Big Bone Lick State Park. And they make the claim this is the birthplace of American vertebrate paleontology, but it also contributed to international paleontology, as I'll tell you in just a second. This became a big thing in an American culture. Once these bones, Jefferson found out about them. Jefferson was our third president, Juan Jose, and he was very interested in science. He was a Renaissance man. And last week, Carol introduced us to Leonardo da Vinci, the archetype Renaissance man. But Jefferson was also a Renaissance man. He was interested in everything. And so he supported spiritually and I think as much with all the influence he could muster, further excavation, particularly by Charles Wilson Peel. And he developed a relationship with a German scientist named Humboldt, who was also looking at this in Europe. Jefferson thought he had discovered among the bones that were collected for him a lion, but it turned out to be an extinct ground sloth. He was misled. He did not think animals went extinct. So when Lewis and Clark went west, they were our explorers. After Jefferson bought the land from Napoleon, he sent a couple of explorers all the way to the Pacific Ocean, a famous expedition, Juan Jose, called the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he wanted them to find live mastodons, live mammoths, live whatever existed, because no one believed that animals could go extinct. When Lewis Clark came back and said, we didn't find any live mastodons, he sent them back for a second trip, specifically to Big Bone Lick to try to find more clues. And this is a great article that how this mastodon boneyard at Big Bone Lick stole Jefferson's heart. And again, they were drawn by the salt, salty water. So he sent them back with 10 men, and this was after their big expedition to the Pacific. And he sent them back into 1807. So all the way to the Pacific on one trip. And then the next trip is the Big Bone Lick again, thought to be the first organized vertebrate paleontology excursion. Jefferson collected all these bones that were being found, and he assembled them in a room in the White House. And eventually they went to museums in Paris and all over the world. Everybody knew of Jefferson's obsession with mammoths and mastodons. And so to honor him, Chester, Massachusetts, created a mammoth Chester cheese block and sent it to the White House. Now, in France, the theorist, the scientist who was on to the idea of extinction, he said he was an intellectual who wasn't deterred by the idea that God wouldn't let anything extinct. He followed the science. And he finally, in 1813, came out with the theory that animals could go extinct. God couldn't save every animal. And according to Colbert in her book, this was a huge moment in science, realizing that extinction was possible. All right, back to Cincinnati itself. Sorry for the excursion there, but the thing that I tie on to is I went to camp in northern Kentucky, 5 miles from Big Bone Lick. So I have any number of personal connections to northern Kentucky, and you'll see more of them in just a second. So where does the name Cincinnati comes from? So Juan Jose, you'll remember when we studied Rome, and the Republic lasted 300 years. It operated fairly well. And there was a famous Roman general, Cincinnatus, who, upon winning a great battle, came home and retired, put down his sword and picked up his plow and became a humble farmer. Now, this is an interesting model because Americans found that inspirational. And when George Washington disbanded the Revolutionary Army, he formed a society of Cincinnatus for all veterans at the end of the war to have an organization where they could come together. But he also wanted everybody to follow Cincinnatus' example, put away their weapons, turn away from violence, and start being productive citizens. And he set the example by giving up power. We talked about that in an earlier lecture, how important that is for dealing with the violence inherent in not just human beings, but many life forms, in wanting to control their environment and give up power. He understood how what a terrible instinct that was, and set a great example by giving up power to his vice president, John Adams. And like Cincinnatus, he returned to Mount Vernon. And John Adams lost an election. It was the first election that was lost to an opponent and somebody from the other side. And just like Washington, he followed Washington's example and gave up power following the Constitution. And boy, oh boy, was that a good role model? Al Gore followed it in the disputed election of 2000, but somebody else 20 years later didn't. So all of this is happening, by the way, in Hamilton County. Hamilton had provided such an inspiration. There are Hamiltons all over the United States. In Cincinnati, it was established in the larger organizing unit called a county in Hamilton County. And I'll show you where that is on a map later. All right, so time goes on, Cincinnati develops, and part of the development in that era was canals. So a canal was built, the Miami Canal, that connected to the Erie Canal, which set up a lot of commerce now between the Great Lakes and the Great Mississippi Basin, of which Ohio was a contributor. Also, slavery, the northern border for slavery was the Ohio River. Cincinnati was on the north shore. So for any slave that wanted to escape slavery, all they had to do was cross the Ohio River. And so it's not surprising that in Cincinnati, there are many African-American churches. And when you get and visit Cincinnati, you'll see an African-American influence, because this was a safe haven. This was a sanctuary. This was where they could escape to. And a lot of African churches are called AME, African Methodist, Episcopalian. They kind of throw in a couple more denominations, but they're AME churches. You got to know that, Juan Jose, because in America, particularly in the last election, African Americans helped swing the election to Joe Biden. And they liked him because he was the most conservative candidate. And many African Americans are religious. So as part of the Democratic coalition, you have white liberals like me and the rest of us, and Asian liberals like a couple of us. And we're in a coalition with African Americans who are more conservative spiritually than some of us are. So that's kind of the split in our coalition. We see the big split in the Republican coalitions is worse, but there is this tension that you should know about. So African Americans could escape across the river. This is the Ohio River in the background. If they get across the Ohio River and they get to a farm, they generally were welcomed and supported by something called the Underground Railroad. It wasn't actually a railroad, but it was a kind of secret road system of people who would support and protect slaves fleeing from slavery. So this is very much a culture of Cincinnati and Ohio. And you can see these slaves made it across on a ferry. And this is an outline of the Underground Railroad. This is interesting to me. A lot of it goes through Indiana. But here's Cincinnati. Here's the bend in the Ohio River. And this is where the Frenchmen in 1739 noticed the sulfur smell and went and investigated. This is Big Bone Lick right down in here. But look, here's a city, Hamilton. Remember I said Hamilton was a hero. And this is where I was born. So I've got another link. My parents are from Northern Kentucky, but they made it and were living in Hamilton when they had me. But the purpose of this map is to show a more noble, important thing called the Underground Railroad for escaped slaves to get, some of them would just keep going all the way to Canada. Just to be doubly sure. So Cincinnati had another thing going on. It's unexpectedly a religious center. A very important theological seminary was founded there in 1829, and the founder was a guy named Lyman Beecher. Remember the name Beecher, because he had a daughter, Harriet Beecher, who later married a guy named Stowe. But Harriet Beecher is living in Cincinnati in a very spiritual world that is able to make ethical and moral judgments. And they obviously don't approve of slavery. She writes a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin from what she observed across the river in Cincinnati. The novel starts off in Northern Kentucky, And at the beginning of the novel, a mulatto, in America, if you're 1/32nd African, you're considered black, and in the South, you were a slave. Even if 1 out of 32 great grandparents was Black, only one. And in this novel, Eva, with her child, and this is her motivation, she learns that she's going to be sold and her child's going to be sold separately. She takes the risk of escaping, jumping from ice floe to ice floe on the Ohio River to the destination Cincinnati, where she is going to be safe and be freed. So she writes this novel, and Juan Jose, in civilization, art is important. We've talked about that. And this novel, through more support to the Abolitionist Movement, which was a movement in the North to get rid of slavery. Abraham Lincoln met her and said, so you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war. And this moment is commemorated. And this is Lincoln meeting with her. And the Civil War is still going on in 1962. But he had obviously been touched by the novel, as have many people. And I read it a couple of years ago just to remind myself of our history. So the Civil War comes, and the people from the hunters, the squirrel hunters of Ohio, mobilize. This is a pontoon bridge across the Ohio. Industry is starting up in the defense of Cincinnati. They built 12 miles of bulwark against the southern ships, any invaders that might come across. And Cincinnati was never attacked in the Civil War because of the defense that they had mounted. Fast forward, industry develops after the Civil War. And I want to draw your attention to this bridge. So you can see that there's some steel mills and smoke belching out. But notice this bridge right here. Here it is. I'll ask the rest of my class.
Wow.
Does this bridge look familiar?
Yes.
What do you think what does it remind you of?
The one in New York?
Yes.
Very good. So this is the Roebling suspension bridge. This is 17 is the bridge that he built from from Covington to Cincinnati. Covington. This is where my mom and dad went to high school. And next door is Newport, which was a wide open city, a sin city, gambling and prostitution. When I was growing up, you never mentioned the word Newport. When I moved to Indianapolis and was a teenager, some of my more daring, adventuresome friends would take a weekend and drive down to Newport for gambling and what else? I don't know. So I'm curious which side of Covington you're going to be on, Juan Jose. You'll let me know. But look, Covington is the where my parents met and fell in love, and I was a glimmer in my father and my mother's eyes right here. Notice in downtown Cincinnati on the north side, there's an area called Over the Rhine, and I'm going to talk about the German influence in Cincinnati in just a second. But yes, the Brooklyn Bridge, and there's the bigger version. So the first Roebling suspension bridge was in 1868. And this is decades later in New York. When both of those bridges were finished, they were the longest suspension bridges in the world. So the longest suspension bridge in the world was led from Covington to Cincinnati. And Roebling was the guy. This is him practicing. This was his practice bridge. And they've obviously preserved it. It's not wide enough for a modern artery, but they've preserved it for historic reasons, the Roebling Bridge. You see it in the backdrops of movies. George Clooney made a movie a couple of years ago. He's from Northern Kentucky, and he put the bridge in the backdrop of a movie. So you can imagine when I went to, all this was subconscious. I went across this bridge. I saw this bridge many times as a child and a teenager. I went down to Northern Kentucky a couple of times a year to visit cousins and relatives. And I never really internalized it as a kid until I got to New York and I saw what was happening. So they've left the bridge up, and it's a kind of a tourist thing. And now, and Cincinnati was also called the gateway to the South. As I said, downstream you get to New Orleans, and going all the way through the South. So that Cincinnati billed itself as that. This is another UC, and the UC in California is the University of California. UC in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati is the University of Cincinnati, where my mother went to school. My father did not go to college, but my mother did. Also, Cincinnati was famous for having the first professional baseball team called the Cincinnati Red Stockings. And they were celebrated. These guys take their baseball so seriously, they're going to make a living out of it. And Harper's Weekly was an important magazine back then. Also, culturally, they started a symphony quite early on, and they attracted famous directors, Leopold Stokowski in 1909. And Leopold Stokowski, I know him. He was in Fantasia and took a bow at the end of Fantasia, which was a amazing combination of beautiful music and great animation, which was a big thing when I was a kid in the 1940s. Leopold Stokowski with Walt Disney. Now, he was succeeded by this guy, an Austrian conductor. So Cincinnati attracted famous European conductors. But this is when I want to talk about Germans and the Germans in Cincinnati. He was not, during World War I, was not sufficiently pro-American. He was kind of neutral, and that wasn't good enough. So he was arrested and put into prison, and went off to a camp, the same kind of camp that Aiko was born in during World War II, because she was. We were in a different war then, again with the Germans, but also with the Japanese. So this gets to the darker side, a segue to the darker side of Cincinnati. Not everything's perfect, not everywhere, and what do you call it? The Bogotazo. Bogota Tazu.
Bogotazo.
I'm sorry?
Bogotazo.
Okay, Bogotazo. Every city has their problems, and Cincinnati did too. And what was it? It was prejudice against immigrants. immigrants from Germany and Ireland. And so what was the beef about immigrants? Both types of immigrants drank too much. According to the Protestant ethic, they weren't sober enough. The Germans like their beer, and the Irish like anything. And so there were WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant riots. A lot of the Germans were Catholic, and as well as were the Irish. So there was a religious element. But there were nativist riots in 1855. A lot of tension leading up to the Civil War contributed. And there had been a big wave of German immigration to Cincinnati. I remember when I was a kid hearing repeatedly people making fun of the German accent. Was you ever in Cincinnati? My aunt married a German named Baumgartner. And my cousin was Bruce, and he had a son, Brian, who was Kevin on The Office. So if you see Kevin Baumgartner in the credits of The Office, this is a very successful TV show, Juan Jose. This is the German influence in Cincinnati, an example. Then they also had race riots. Being the recipient of escaped slaves wasn't always a welcome thing, particularly the Irish. The Irish have trouble with tolerance of African Americans, and we've seen that in New York City repeatedly. The draft riots during the Civil War, they didn't want to go fight for African Americans, and they took it out. We see it. We saw a great play at Berkeley Rep about Stephen Foster, who lived in Five Points area of New York City, where that Martin Scorsese film on New York took place, which was also about the Irish and Irish gangs in New York City. So that's a part of the problem. Periodic race riots, orphanages burned, street civil unrest. There was a cholera epidemic in the 1840s, and Jews were not allowed into existing hospitals. So that gave an impetus to the Jewish community to build the first Jewish hospital in America. And there are Jewish hospitals everywhere. Jewish hospital in Denver that I went to for a special seminar on tuberculosis when I was in the public health part of the Indian Health Service, a small hospital on the Western Reservation, and I was in charge of taking care of the tuberculosis program, among other duties. And they sent me to the Jewish hospital in Denver to learn the latest treatments for tuberculosis. You'll find Jewish hospitals sprinkled around America and other places besides Cincinnati and Denver. All right, so that's what I was going to go and talk a little bit about the update of COVID, but you know what? I think that let's stop and take questions.
I don't have any questions, but that was great.
Thank you.
That-
I had a lot of self motivation in that. A lot of my roots.
Yeah, but it gave it color. It was really good. John, did you learn a lot going back, looking at that all again, or was that all in your memory?
Oh, well, I knew what I needed to look up. I couldn't, I had to review all the details. I remember from when I was reading The Sixth Extinction, I was struck with her visit to Big Bone Lick, because I looked on the map where that was, and it was like 5 miles from where I grew up. So, you know, the thing is with history, if you pay attention to what's going on around you, and you'll find the connections that are just amazing. And seeing the connection to the Brooklyn Bridge, what the hell? That's fascinating too. So, and the connection with Juan Jose coming to the place of my roots and giving me a chance to go back and review everything and make a slideshow out of it. I loved it.
Thank you, Juan Jose, in that case. You're the instigator.
You're very centrally located in Cincinnati too. You can go south, you can go east, and you're a little bit of a ways from the west, but there's a lot of things there that are good places to see. So you'll be seeing all of us.
Nice.
And I'm assuming you'll be coming to California.
For sure, I will. After we're done with COVID, we have to do a presential class.
There you go. Absolutely. And John, thank you. You brought in the Japanese Americans, Jewish, Germans, Irish, Catholic, and we all have that. You know, we're such a mishmash. It's like, that was really interesting.
Well, it's all there. And the other connection is I got the head of the hospital, the administrator of the hospital, a new one came in the 1980s, and he was married to a woman whose mother was the mayor of Cincinnati. And the interesting thing is, she was Jewish. She was Jewish. They had a female Jewish mayor in Cincinnati in the 1980s.
That's pretty forward thinking.
Yeah.
There's hope. There's hope.
Yeah. Yeah. So connections, you can't avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize. I have to leave because Atul Gawande is talking at noon on UCSF Ground Rounds. So
wow.
I'm gonna escape and go on to the next thing.
Irene, I want more information too about COVID. I have all kinds of questions having a pregnant daughter. So I might call you sometime.
Yeah. Pregnancy is unknown, by the way. But anyway, not that pregnancy is unknown. COVID affects pregnancy is unknown.
Can you explain it to me? How did it happen?
You know nothing about immaculate.
It's a big bird. Rini, send me the link. Rini, send me the link so I can join you.
All right.
Okay. Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
I'm also gonna go now. Thank you everyone for this class, and thank you, Mr. John, for this great context of the place where I'm gonna live in.
Great, and
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Congratulations. That's so great.
That is
Thanks
great.
a lot.
We're really
Thanks a lot.
excited. You should land in California first and we'll get used to things.
Yeah, that will be a really good plan.
Yeah, and so someone needs to give you a warning about how cold it gets in Ohio.
I'll make sure I bring my
Only
jacket.
in the winters.
Well, you can walk across the Ohio River on ice floes.
Yeah, this is not, you have to run. You have to hold a baby.
Yeah.
Okay, bye everyone. Take care. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay.
That was fun.
All righty.
So you're here, Barbara, instead of in Tahoe this week. I'm sorry, my phone's going off. I'm so sorry. Oh, okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll see you next